Welcome to Better For Y'all, where a couple above-average idiots offer lowbrow commentary on highbrow health and wellness issues. Welcome back to the BBcast.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
We're going to talk all about how the things that we put into our body these days might be making us gay.
Ooh, that's a hot topic.
Isn't it? I know, it's a little
super hot.
I know. I hope we don't cross any lines today.
Oh, I have no doubt that we will. Before we do though, I want to hear. You told me before we started recording that you finished listening to or watching the documentary. What? And the documentary I'm referring to, of course, from episode 1 was the one on Netflix about the study where one member of a twin group, right, became a vegan, and they kind of studied the differences between the vegan and the omnivore. So what did the documentary say? Right.
So you can go back and watch that whole episode that we did last week to kind of get a deeper look at our thoughts on that. But I just noticed something that I thought was worth pointing out. So in episode 2, they were following, this TV show was following 4 sets of twins, 2 males and 2 females. And in the second episode, they started out with the 2 sets of female twins in a doctor's office, and they were choosing what kind of porn they were going to be looking at. Yeah, so right I'm kind of like, what's going on here? Well,
what kind of doctor was this?
Well, as it turned out, what they were looking to do was see if there would be a difference in moisture, arousal, wetness, warmth, humidity, dankness, whatever was going on in the loins of these 4 women. They wanted to look at it, and so they gave them each an iPad and gave them a variety of pornography to choose from, and they had a FLIR imager, like right, just like, right in front of them while they watched it.
Why?
Totally. So they wanted to look and see a change from baseline following, the 8-week intervention period of the twins eating either a vegan or an omnivorous diet.
So they wanted to see if becoming vegan made your snatch dry.
Totally.
Did it?
Well, no. What they found out is that it was basically a heat map that they looked at. So they determined that, they had a percentage increase. Everybody became more aroused by the end of the 8 weeks. Yeah, I know. It was.
So they did the porn at the beginning and the porn at the end?
Yeah.
Did they control for watching the same porn at the beginning and the end?
They didn't, but the women had their preferences.
There's so many confounding variables in this situation. I don't think I could take this seriously at all.
I know. They didn't. This was not reported in the paper. This data
was just for Netflix.
It definitely it was pretty scandalous. But it was also it wasn't. It wasn't. We weren't watching pornography on Netflix, and they did make it accessible for people, I suppose. But
I mean, you certainly can watch near pornography on Netflix, though. I mean, this is right up Netflix alley for sure.
It was far from robust science. It really, like what they found, what they determined on these heat maps was that and again, there was no like statistical significance that I was able to find, but the women on the vegan diet had greater percentage increase on their heat map, as determined, as some nebulous determination by the physician, who was an older male, an old guy.
Loves his job, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So the conclusion was that being vegan makes you statistically significantly more aroused by pornography than if you're an omnivore?
At least that's what they found with these when looking at these 4 women.
Well, there you go. There's your reason to become a vegan if you didn't have one already.
Yeah, check.
Okay.
So that
good follow-up.
I know. And I think it'll be a seamless transition into what we're going to talk about today. So a couple years back, there was a PETA online campaign. And the gist of it was that mothers who had high urinary levels of phthalates, which are, essentially they're used to soften plastic.
That's what phthalates are.
That's what phthalates are.
Okay.
We'll get into this whole class.
Turns
of
out that's
chemicals.
not all they soften. Foreshadowing there, people. Continue.
So moms with higher urinary levels of these chemicals gave birth to sons with teenuses.
What the hell is that?
A teenis?
Yeah.
A tiny penis?
Oh. Sorry.
Yeah,
Is that some new internet vernacular?
Well, I didn't want the censors to. I didn't want. We talk about baby penises. I didn't know if that was going to get.
I wouldn't do that. Yeah, in fact, I would beep that out later if I were you. Yeah.
Well,
especially in light of all the Epstein stuff, we don't need to go down that
baby
path.
dicks. I mean, imagine the investigators doing this study. I mean, like whipping out and measuring baby penises.
Well,
once they pop out of the womb.
There's something maybe a little bit more innocent about the medical aspect of things, but you're right. I mean, that'd be an awkward position to be in as a doctor, I would say.
It's a strange angle for PETA to take here.
Yeah.
That, essentially if your mom ate chicken, like, I hope you enjoy your micro penis.
Sorry, your mom hated you. That's what their study was like?
Was not what the study was. The study had nothing to do with eating chicken. PETA just made that leap because chicken flesh typically has a relatively higher concentration of these chemicals compared to the flesh of some other animals, and compared to how concentrated it is in other aspects of the food supply. So
this is sort of a equals B, B equals C, so therefore A equals C kind of situation.
Yeah, exactly.
And is that a fallacy, or is that, and no pun intended, by the way. But I mean, like, is there legitimacy to that in some cases, or in this case?
I'm never one to plant definitive flags on stuff like this, because I'm sure there's some example where you can make that leap. But I don't know how you do it in this case, and I don't know exactly how you determine there's a clinical relevance here, because the mean peen the mean size of these baby penises.
Don't. You can say it differently than that. You can, and you should.
So the study population had a mean penile length of 7 millimeters. It's tiny. It's a tiny little baby dick.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean,
we're like, like not even,
I mean, basically like barely even. I mean, it's just, I haven't seen a lot of baby dicks. I'm guessing they're not too, girthy. But
really
anyway.
Don't need to get into more detail than that. Yeah.
Anyway,
go without your commentary on that.
What's the clinical relevance of the study itself? That kind of opened up a little bit of area of exploration in my mind. I was like, why are we looking at this?
Mm-hmm.
What are these things? We're hearing about these things all the time right now. They're the hottest thing to hate in the nutrition. Phthalates, PFAS, forever chemicals, BPA, these endocrine disrupting chemicals,
right.
The EDCs, everyday carry, if you will, because we're
carrying them around.
We're just carrying them around forever.
Wow.
As it turns out. So these things, again, like we talked about, the phthalates, they make plastics softer. BPA, that's some of these PFAS and BPAs. These are put on surfaces to make them resistant to like oil or water or grease.
Right. So I mean, we have like Teflon is a good example. Any pan coated with a non-stick surface typically has some kind of these chemicals in it, right?
Right. The food will never stick to the pan because what the pan's made of will stick to you forever.
I see what you did there. I see what you did there. Okay, and here's something that I want to kind of dig into a little bit, because these chemicals, like BPA, for example, had its moment many years ago now. It became, the public became aware that BPAs were in water bottles. I remember Nalgene was sort of under fire because Nalgenes were kind of popular at the time, and other plastic water bottles for that matter. And it was a pretty swift response for manufacturers to take BPA out of those water bottles. So BPA free became all the rage. But what did they put in there instead? Because these bottles needed something to soften them. So from what I understand, now there's a variety of BPA alternatives like BPS and I think BPD and a variety of other, basically just added a different letter to the end instead of A. Are they substantially different? Are they better for us, or are they not? Do we know?
We don't know. And that's really the $1 million question here. Is what we do know is that there at this point are hundreds of in vitro, animal, human, epidemiologic birth cohort studies that show that effects or associations between these environmental chemicals and things like obesity. And these, we're including systematic reviews, meta-analyses, many, many thousands of pages of documents at this point from research institutions all over the world, at least associating the presence of these chemicals with disrupted hormonal signaling, disruption in transcription factors, a whole variety of questionable health outcomes.
What are the, in layman's terms, what are the effects of those two things you just mentioned, hormonal signaling and transcription factors?
Vast and varied. A lot of these, there's a new kind of model of obesity. So we're always looking at how we can bridge the gap between the individual's choices and the systemic factors involved in driving negative health outcomes. And so one of the big ones we've always looked at is this the model of obesity, because obesity is becoming, as you well know, over the last 50 to 70 years, we've just seen this rising rate of obesity. It's affecting populations it previously hadn't. It's running rampant in small children. So we're trying to figure out what the causes are. There were really like two primary models previous to the last 10 years or so. One was this energy balance model, and that's the whole calories in, calories out. Mm-hmm. Then you had another carbohydrate insulin model, which was more of a energy storage situation. We began to look beyond, or go dig a little deeper into what's known as the redox model.
What's that?
So your mitochondria is basically responsible for energy generation at the cellular level. When you've met your energy needs, but there's an excess balance, your mitochondria wind up generating what are called reactive oxidative species, ROS. Mm-hmm. So these are the reasons why people take antioxidants.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So as you begin collecting these ROS, these reactive oxidative species, you can have cellular damage that ensues if you're not able to kind of clear those species. And ultimately, like the more species that develop, your antioxidant systems become overwhelmed. They're unable to clear the species that are there. More build up, leads to cellular damage, leads to metabolic injury.
Interesting.
Okay.
So when you say that, you mean like, is that obesity? Is that cancer? All the above?
It can lead to any number of metabolic disorders, when she started talking about, the body's going to respond to excess of glucose. You're going to have the beta cells in your pancreas release insulin to try and shuttle that glucose into the cells that it needs just to live, whether that's brain, muscle, these sinks that the body has good as a good way of storing that energy. If with the presence of too many of these reactive oxidation species, or too much glucose, you do wind up with an energy imbalance. You wind up with de novo lipogenesis, which is where your body begins to its typical facilities for dealing with glucose breakdown, and it winds up generating fat, particularly around your organs. So this is that visceral fat that we start to hear about that becomes very difficult for people to deal with.
Yeah. So to get back to the conversation around these forever chemicals, these endocrine disrupting chemicals, the presence of those tend to lead to these sort of disorders that people are facing.
So now we have this new model that's the obesogen model. And what it does is it basically works to connect the environmental factors with the energy balance and energy storage malfunctioning that we see. So it's this kind of holistic view of how we become disrupted metabolically through not only environmental factors, but also but also the carbohydrate model by too many carbs.
Right. So our diet is off just enough that causes an imbalance, and then compound that with all of the things in all the household goods that we use, or in the cookware, or in plastic bottles or whatever, and then you've kind of got this perfect storm of factors that can cause a variety of different maladies.
Right, because we're trying to. It's one thing to focus in clinically on an individual, but why are we seeing these vulnerable populations that previously weren't being affected, namely juveniles? What's happening in utero? What's happening epigenetically that is causing these changes? So that's where these models sort of, that's the whole downstream, that's where our interest lies in defining each of these models, is determining what we can do to prevent this epidemic from happening in the future.
Right. So we had talked about how these chemicals are being highlighted for removal. Like the FDA seems to be working on our behalf to the extent that they're pushing for these things to be removed from like baby products, right? Because we don't want to introduce kids to these chemicals at a sensitive developmental age when there can be significant downstream effects, right?
Right. So this part of the conversation gets a little funky because we assume that the FDA, the EPA, the National Institutes of Health, Consumer Protective Services or whatever, we assume that these products, how do they make it to market without really rigorous testing? And the fact of it is they don't. They ultimately, what happens is we have a set of chemicals that get okayed for use based on sometimes 70-year-old data that has obviously evolved over time and has had more and more opportunities to show its effect. But what we've seen happen is, this is in 2016, there was a citizens petition to the FDA to remove a handful of specific subtypes of phthalates from the market. So the FDA receives this petition from the citizens. They then go to industry and they say, manufacturers, what do y'all think about this? The manufacturers respond, oh, we've actually stopped using most of these. We still use a couple of these. And so the FDA at that point then turns around, denies the petition that the citizens sent to them, but says, hey, we're going to pull the authorization on 25 of the 28 that you wanted pulled, but not because of potential safety issues, only because they're no longer in use in industry.
So they basically did not admit that they had failed in any way to protect consumer health by saying, oh yeah, these 25 are actually bad for you, and you're right, we should get rid of them. But rather, well, no need to really investigate if they're good or bad. The manufacturers have already stopped using them, so don't worry about it. Also, don't worry about these 3 that we didn't discontinue use of because what was their justification? How could they possibly say, oh, we're just going to continue to use these 3, even though like you guys are establishing that there might be some health concerns here?
So this is a case of, absence of evidence is maybe evidence of absence. It's very difficult to determine any kind of acute impact of these chemicals on development in a human.
What were the 3? Do we know specifically what the 3 phthalates were?
Oh, we could pull that list up.
I'd be really curious to know what research there is to suggest any link to health.
So,
health impacts.
I mean, there's you've got MEH. So it's what is it? Methyl hexyl phthalate. There's like a monoethyl hexyl phthalate. There's a diethyl hexyl phthalate. And then there's like just a monoethyl phthalate and a diethyl phthalate. Those are like the big ones that seem to be still used.
They all sound like things you would not want in your body.
Yeah, just some chemistry bullshit that like, better living through chemistry. That's what kind of ushered in this modern life.
What is that, like DuPont's slogan
Totally.
or something? Actually, it seems like it would be better living through chemistry as like everyone's like glowing and fucking vibrating.
And remember, this is one class of these things. We've gone on to identify a handful of these from parabens that are in things like aerosols or in our deodorants or shampoos, dishwashing detergent, laundry detergent, all this stuff, to the liners that help, keep things wicking sweat from you, to the liner on the inside of an aluminum can, and to, again, the phthalates that add a bit of flexibility to plastic. These things are the PFAS that are so dominant across non-stick cookware. Anytime you wash anything that's made of polyester, this hoodie, your shirt, whatever, like anytime you wash that stuff winds up going into the water supply.
And is that something that is typically removed by contemporary wastewater treatment?
It doesn't appear that it is.
Really? So that stuff is recycling through into the drinking water.
Yeah, these nanoparticles. If you and they've looked at this now. I mean, it's something like 97% of juveniles, of kids 13 to 17 years old have circulating PFAS in their urine and their blood.
Wild.
Yeah. And so again, long term, we start to wonder, what is the hormonal impact? What's happening from a, gene signaling perspective? At what time point are these effects being noticed? Is this, does this have something to do with why, female onset puberty is coming about much earlier?
Well, yeah,
than it ever has.
Right. I think, yeah, no, we started off talking about this in the context of like something very spicy, right? Like penis size. Oh gosh, like, heaven forbid, like anything happened to that. And truly, because it does have reproductive health impacts, but also like just thinking about it from a broader perspective, like this does mean that kids develop differently or more quickly or less quickly. I mean, whatever was normal, whatever was sort of the natural, like typical progression is modified in some way that is more than likely not good because it's not the way that nature would have previously intended it to be in the absence of these things, right?
Totally. And this is bearing out in some of these randomized controlled clinical trials where they are looking at, they're seeing mothers who have, again, these higher levels of these endocrine disrupting chemicals in their urine. They're seeing things like a smaller anogenital distance in males. So you've seen a vagina before.
I have.
And you've seen your package before every day, probably.
Indeed.
Most days,
Yep.
sometimes several times a day. You're pretty familiar with both. So what we know is that typically that distance is a certain percentage larger for males than it is for females. So
the distance from
the middle of your anus, the middle of your butthole to the beginning of your genitalia. Okay. We've referred to this as the taint, right?
Technical term.
Yeah, exactly. But the AGD, the anogenital distance, is how the anatomists will refer to that.
And because we're mature,
it's a good marker of androgenic development for kids.
And because we're mature and professional, we will refer to it as the AGD, not the taint.
Yeah, totally.
But interesting to note that something so juvenile would have such interesting scientific impact, or relevance today. Anyway.
Yeah. So that seems to be where in this attempt to, I mean, for lack of a better word, gaslight, we get industry and bureaucracy teaming up to tell us, with regards to the BPA situation. So they say, first they deny that anything's wrong, right? These things are perfectly safe. Use them on everything. Then they say, oh, wait a minute. Some of these BPAs aren't safe. We're gonna replace it, but it's okay because we're replacing it with BPS. Then they essentially normalize these things, and they've become so ubiquitous that it's hard to really live without them. And this is what's known as the kind of cross-industry playbook of consumer deception. This is how they sort of frame their arguments to alleviate any concerns from the consumer that there's any nefarious activities afoot. This is Big Sugar did it, Big Tobacco did it. They do it for this. You see these same arguments with climate change. You see the same arguments in transportation industries, across all industries. This is a common playbook used.
Walk us through that framework as it might have been employed by one of those industries.
So again, like we'll use the example at hand. So with these chemicals, they first said there's nothing wrong with these chemicals. We're going to allow their use in industry. Then they get adopted widespread. Then they say, oh, wait a minute. They get adopted widespread and certain things start to happen and the consumer begins to question their use. And then as kind of like an olive branch of sorts, industry, bureaucracy say, oh, yes, there are some problems, but we're going to introduce a new one that'll solve that problem. Okay. So then that system becomes fairly normalized. Then you have, you start to look at, people begin to, nothing has changed. These products are still in existence. So the same things that people were alarmed about to begin with are continuing. People are still having dysfunction in some regard. So then the blame gets put on the individual at that point. It gets shifted away from industry, and it's looked at as, oh, well, maybe it's because, yeah, we do use all these products in fast food wrappers, ultra processed food. Like maybe the individual shouldn't be eating as much ultra processed food.
Yeah, this is a lifestyle choice. You
You
shouldn't be eating that or whatever. Huh.
Then it becomes scattered, where these products are so ingrained in everyday life across multiple industries, across multiple use occasions, where it's just become so normalized within daily life, and the web has become so complex and interwoven that it's impossible to disentangle it.
It's overwhelming.
And the consumer at that point is like, well, any one of these other frames, perhaps there's a way that we could work to, eliminate these problems, but we can't, because it's just so ubiquitous.
It's everywhere
in everything that we do. And
some people just give up.
And
very convenient for the the industrial players that are using these chemicals or whatever product they're trying to continue using.
And what you're starting to see is that I hate to be so conspiratorial about this, but because these things are fairly consistent across decades and across industries, it's worth pointing out. You get these situations where, right now the FDA is being very vocal and active in pursuing they look very deeply at removing heavy metals from the supply chain, and particularly within products that are geared towards humans that are under the age of 2. So they're looking very specifically at something different than the PFAS, the phthalates, the parabens. They're looking at a different potential endocrine disruptors that are still associated with industry, but maybe not quite as economically impactful, and maybe a little easier to remove from the chain. Lead paint, having various toxic heavy metals in these products is something that the public can easily glom onto. It's like easier for us to understand that maybe it's bad to have lead, aluminum, some of these things in our food than it is some of these other like more esoteric chemical compounds that like most of us don't really understand.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I think that there's probably there's been more time for those to be in the zeitgeist, if you will. I mean, all the way back to classic stories like Alice in Wonderland, right? Like the Mad Hatter was mad because of the mercury used in felting hats that made him go crazy. Like that's an age-old story, dating back probably hundreds of years, right? So people are more familiar with those compounds, more understood the effects that they can have on people. So perhaps it's a little easier to wrap our minds around that rather than this like really long amalgamation of hexodimethyl, whatever the hell it is, right? Like that's just a lot harder to conceptualize, and especially because there's so many more of them. Like they're creating new ones every day to replace the ones that we've decided are bad. So like it is sort of just this like whack-a-mole of chemicals that appear in everyday life. I can totally understand why people would get overwhelmed by it because, okay, so you say, okay, we have to get rid of endocrine disrupting chemicals. What does that mean if you want to eliminate those from your life? It means hygiene products, personal care products. It means laundry detergent and dryer sheets and fabric softener. And it also means dish soap and hand soap. And, oh, it's in your clothes too. And it's like, where isn't it? Where aren't they at this point?
Very few. I mean, essentially, this becomes a very deep rabbit hole that one can pursue, and it will 100% involve being ostracized from your community, depending on, who's in your community.
Yeah,
it will absolutely, it's going to cause some inconveniences for your family. It's going to cause it's going to ruffle some feathers, it's going to cause some inconveniences for you. And it causes us to maybe accept some of the trappings of modern lifestyle as being not quite everything that we were promised, and
it's
maybe not
necessarily better living with chemistry.
It's not, these are some things that I've come to realize over the past couple months with regards to like how I, approach just the silly little things that we have to do as humans, like washing our clothes. It's like, you actually don't really need some of these things that were pushed
to varying degrees, right?
You'd be surprised, like how much stink you can get out of your clothes with just hot water and baking soda.
That's fair.
You'd be surprised at how clean you can get your body with, a olive oil based soap that doesn't have, that doesn't smell like a, babbling Irish brook or whatever.
But it's so pleasant.
You'd be surprised at how quickly you can feel your skin being moisturized with beef tallow. Some of these things that we have like, it seems so weird when you tell people that you put fat on your face. Let's not forget that, soap is fats.
Well, right. Yeah. What is body wash? Or like, what are these like, or like a moisturizing cream or something like that? Like, it's really just like some sort of synthetic lipid, right?
Totally.
As opposed to an animal-based lipid.
And we're fucking couple of above average idiots here. So we're going to we're not like lipid chemists.
I wouldn't go that far. I would not go that far. I am average Joe through and through.
So, I mean, what I do know is you'll see, on a thing of face cream, fortified with vitamin E, or
aloe.
You see these things. It's like, why is it so weird to rub a fat on your face that comes from an animal that's very rich in vitamins A, B, C, D, E, and K, that's not dissimilar from your own skin, the layers of sebum that are, excreted from your own pores. Why is it so weird to rub that on your face? Something that you'd have no problem eating, but it's like totally okay to, rub this
petrochemical,
this petrochemical from Procter and Gamble or whoever all over, the largest organ on your body. Like, you wouldn't take a bite out of your bar of old Irish Spring or whatever, but like you'll happily rub it all over your porous armpits.
Mm-hmm.
You'll happily rub these things. Like, you won't eat them, but you'll put them on the largest organ on your body.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a fair point. I think there's a couple avenues I want to go down here, just because there are questions that are popping up for me. One is, okay, so these are called forever chemicals. If you've lived a life as long as I have, or you have, 30 plus years using these things, is it too late? They're already in me. Can I get them out? Or is it like, is there a benefit to stopping now versus just say, screw it, I'm just going to live my life and not be that guy who rubs beef tallow on his armpits?
It does seem that there is some positive evidence that these things that a normal, healthy individual can get rid of these things relatively quickly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they're not forever chemical. I mean, they're forever in the world, maybe, but not necessarily in the human body.
It's hard to determine the epigenetic alterations that have occurred from our parents consuming them when we were in the womb.
Can you explain that just briefly, epigenetics, what that is?
Yeah, that's this idea that the actions, behavior, environment, patterns of consumption, lifestyle choices of your parents can actually signal certain genetic factors to within the progeny.
So they can effectively, the decisions that your parents made, or perhaps even their parents, can have genetic effects on your DNA generations later, or even your kids' genetic information.
Yeah, they've showed associations. I mean, even like funny things like, I mean, if your mom worked out when she was pregnant with you, you're more likely to assign yourself as a gym rat later in life.
Interesting.
You're more likely to be an active person.
So just as epigenetics can
associations, but these things do exist.
And so just as easily as those may indicate positive lifestyle choices or impacts for you, they can also translate negative things as well. So if your parents worked in a deodorant factory and they're around a ton of aluminum or something like that, like the impact that might have had on their DNA or their genetic makeup in some way could imprint itself on you or future generations.
Yeah, and this evidence is bearing itself out and becoming impossible to deny. And I think that's why you're starting to see these products or these EDCs being removed from products that are specifically, utilized by babies. It's like the industry, FDA, et cetera, are, like I said, extending this olive branch, or is it a smoke screen of sorts? Is it meant to establish consumer trust that this is something that these companies do care, these organizations do care, or is there some other kind of like more nefarious motive, or is it just like they can't deny it, they need to start doing triage, might as well start with babies,
right?
with the ones that we can actually do something about,
for sure. For sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a couple threads to pull there. I mean, like, we both know that, I mean, value judgment aside, companies' first objective is to make money and to benefit their shareholders if they're a public company, but to create profits, because that's why people go into business. That's why businesses exist, is to create valuable products for consumers and to create value and to produce revenue.
Totally.
You can't exist without that.
No, the executives at P&G or wherever, like, they want a healthy family too.
Well, sure. Absolutely. Why not? But just like, tech CEOs might select which social media platforms they let their own kids on or which media they let their own kids consume, you might wonder if the CEO of Procter & Gamble allows those products into his or her home versus maybe more natural alternatives. But we don't need to get into the psychoanalysis of the CEO of a large CPG company necessarily. There's a lot we don't know about that, so that's not really fruitful. But bottom line is, there is evidence to suggest that a healthy human can detox from some of these forever chemicals relatively quickly. What's relatively quickly?
I think these things get out of your system in 24 hours. The problem is we're just constantly exposed to them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I mean, say you were to just completely purify your home tomorrow and get rid of all of them. Are you still exposed peripherally from like what's coming out of your neighbor's dryer vent and pumping into the air that's getting sucked into your house? Like, how puritanical do you need to be to like protect yourself from these things? I mean, and maybe you don't know, but
I don't have all the answers here. Here's how I've gone about assessing and managing my risk. So I'm a firm believer, proponent in getting regular blood work done. Okay. We know that. So the things, the easy things to start with would be looking at your liver enzymes, ALT and AST, looking at your kidney function, your glomerular filtration rate. If you can look at those things first, because these are going to be the first phase detox, first line of defense in terms of detoxification. If you can look at those and say, hopefully, everything is going great. You can at least say, okay, I'm doing all of the things I need upstream in terms of my lifestyle, my hydration, and et cetera, to make sure that my detox system is firing. If you see that there's some issues, there's easy things that you can remedy them with. There's supplemental things that can be remedied. I'm not going to recommend any supplements, but
we are not doctors.
Yeah, exactly.
This is not medical advice.
There are any number of sources that you can pursue on your own to look at how you can benefit your detox system. So I would start there. Just those are relatively easy things to look at.
So understand your baseline, where your blood work is now and how your internal filtration systems are working.
Yep.
And then if someone wanted the top levers to pull in terms of removing some of these things from daily life, consumption, the home, et cetera, what would be the top ones you would look to?
Man, I hope that this makes people realize how sincere I am about this, given that my living comes from the sales of beverages in aluminum cans. I personally have limited my intake of drinks from aluminum cans. I keep that to a bare minimum.
Because of the chemicals in the liner
that's inside of all of those cans.
Wow.
That's probably something my partners would hate to hear me say.
But I think it does demonstrate, a degree of high, integrity to be honest about that. So alternatively, you would drink out of what, glass or stainless steel?
Glass or stainless steel works great. Certainly avoid plastic. Every time you unscrew that plastic lid, you're getting nanoparticles of plastic that go into that beverage. They're establishing that within any plastic sealed beverage, there's, some
hundreds of thousands of units of particles of microplastic.
Every time you unscrew the lid, screw it back on, you're going to get those little microparticles that you're consuming.
So ditch consuming
plastic
from plastic. Mm-hmm. But plastic packaging is ubiquitous in food.
Right. It's exactly, including all of the food that packages anything you get from Wendy's or Taco Bell.
Not even that. You're going to eat the highest quality organic grass-fed ground beef that you can buy from your local co-op, and it's going to come in a shrink-wrapped plastic pouch, or it's going to come in waxed paper of some kind that I have to imagine has some sort of plastic chemical lining, right?
Yeah, and what's the alternative there? I don't know yet.
You got to literally go butcher the cow yourself. Just take a bite right out of it in the field.
Yeah, these things will probably get addressed at some point. Or maybe we start, drying out the intestines and sealing the meat in the stomach or something. I don't know. That's ridiculous, right? But
it seems
this is not every day. That's a solution that maybe agriculture will solve at some point. That's a tiny one.
To me, the bigger hurdle, though, is going to be the FDA, right? Or the regulatory bodies that certify the packaging that food comes in, because they are the last line of approval for, what counts as a food safe barrier for your product. They're the ones that mandate, and probably rightfully so, right? That a beverage have a liner inside the can. Because do you want the beverage in direct contact with aluminum?
With the aluminum, right?
Probably not, because we know that aluminum is a neurotoxin, which you are getting on your lips every time you put your mouth on an aluminum can. There have to be microparticles of aluminum there, right?
Oh, totally. We did the corrosivity testing with our liquids, and met well below the minimum detectable limit. But that's a thing that you're only required to do one time for one can manufacturer. And there are how many thousands of beverage brands in aluminum cans, both sophisticated and startups, being most of the cans that you buy on the shelf at a grocery store aren't actually packaged by the brand or whatever that says on the can. It's, that brand has given up all control of production to, some co-packer, co-manufacturer, and, hopefully they're dialed in their compliance and, all of the food safety stuff.
But even if they are, and the regulatory body that is overseeing their compliance isn't mandating that they do things beyond a certain scope, which certainly they aren't, right? Because it's not like the FDA is looking at beverage manufacturers and saying, oh, well, we really need to be looking at the contents of the liner of the can because blah, blah.
No.
They don't, like, that
is not something they give a shit about.
They don't. I mean, more likely than not, the regulators at the FDA or wherever have come from,
what they
or
care
are going
about?
to
They
a major food or beverage manufacturer.
Totally. I mean, there's absolutely that, that regulatory capture situation going on. I mean, most health departments will force you to use some of these chemicals in cleaning your surfaces. Like, you can't operate without having a quat cleaner. Like the health department, the local health department, city, state, or otherwise, is not going to allow you to operate if you have food surfaces without chemicals that sanitize surfaces that include these endocrine disruptors.
There are endocrine disruptors in like a quaternary sanitizer.
Yeah.
What do you know what ones off the top of your head?
Parabens, I think.
Wild.
Yeah. So like, there's certain levels of bureaucracy that have just made it impossible to avoid these things. If you're manufacturing consumer packaged goods, and therefore if you're consuming packaged goods, you're being exposed to these, whether or not you've ever given any consent. To.
So the best things that you can do, the highest leverage, levers that you can pull to get some of these things out of your life would be being deliberate and intentional about the containers from which you consume, right?
Yeah,
so
coffee, reusable or disposable coffee cups, don't get that shit out of here.
Right. Like get a reusable stainless steel coffee mug and bring that to your barista to make your coffee in that instead, right? Like, that's a pretty easy one.
You and I have been using a beef tallow based deodorant.
Oh, you're gonna just out me like that on the show? You're gonna make me that guy? People are gonna be like, "Oh my god, he's the guy who's fucking." No, it's all right. My other podcast, everyone already makes fun of me for being the guy who rubs his deodorant on with his finger, which I'm okay with, because you know what? I feel better about not putting whatever those chemicals are on my skin. And I do want to make sure that we get to this, and we don't have to dive all the way into it right now, but I want to talk to the audience about why it is that we're doing this show and what the purpose is and the value that we want to hope to add here, which I think is taking a little bit of the insider knowledge that you and I have in the food and beverage industry from years of working in that space and convey that, and also give people, a little bit of an idea of ways that we can incrementally improve our lives through, the Kaizen approach to personal health, and also just like the freedom and the responsibility that we have to make intentional decisions about the things that we put in and on our bodies. Yeah. And that's one of them. I mean, anything that goes on your skin is like you said, being absorbed into the body's largest organ. That's a huge one. Dude,
I'm really grateful that we get to kind of be the test subjects for a lot of this stuff, because I mean, we're not perfect by any stretch. These are trappings of modern society that we're testing on ourselves. We're seeing that there are problems. We're removing them. We're identifying alternatives. We're constantly evolving our understanding of what it means to be better. And, that's what I'm hoping that we can kind of impress upon anyone that likes and subscribes to this, or even just listens passively, is that, we don't need we don't need everybody to be perfect. We need like everybody to just be a little better.
Well, yeah, and I mean, that's the opportunity that we each have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, because we talk about the philosophy behind the better for you space in general can be laden with a bit of guilt, right? It was like, oh, well, you're not making the best decision by going to Wendy's or, by eating this convenience meal, this highly processed thing. But like we have busy lives and we have situations where we don't always get to make the best decisions, but there are places where we do make the better decision we can, and to just apply that opportunity to be like 1% better here or there, that 1% adds up across a year, across a day.
You apply that principle and watch the momentum that builds behind it. Mm-hmm. It starts translating into all these other aspects of your life.
Yeah. I think we have an interesting opportunity to, like you said, be the test subjects in a way, because we are seemingly similar in the sense that we are willing to be early adopters of interesting new trends or, health products or whatever. And hopefully, we can stumble onto some things that provide value to others as well. And I think that there are a few things out there, a few levers we can pull that can have an outsized impact. And I look forward to exploring some of those.
Oh, we're going to get into it. We're going to get deep, buddy.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Yes, we are. I'm ready for it.
All right.
Final thoughts before we close up?
Don't wrap your barbecue in aluminum foil.
And don't wrap your balls in plastic. Thanks for watching. And apparently vegans have more fun in the bedroom.
Dude, I have a really good time in the bedroom. Dude, my virility, my like sexual energy has, without a doubt, it's just measurable. Like my T levels, since I've started giving a shit about this stuff, I was told by the doctor at Deaconess to stop doing some of the things. And I'm natural. I'm not taking exogenous testosterone or anything like that. I was told by the doctor at Billings Clinic that my testosterone was too high for a 40-year-old man.
What's the problem with that?
It can lead to, like cardiovascular event. They've got.
So you can have a heart attack while having the best sex of your life and go out like a goddamn hero.
I'm okay with.
Yeah, you are.
You are. I would absolutely take being on the high side. And again, there's lots of variables that I've augmented, but we've mentioned just a couple here. There are others, and we'll get into them.
Yeah.
Over time.
I look forward to that.
Mm-hmm. Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Like and subscribe. Thank you. We love you.
See you soon.